My mother once told me, "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart. And that's okay. Someone has to support the stars." She said it gently, over coffee, like she was doing me a kindness. I was 19, freshly commissioned, my uniform still stiff with pride. She didn't mean to hurt me, at least, I don't think she did. But that sentence split me in half. It became the quiet soundtrack of my life. Every holiday, every visit home, I heard it echo in how they doted on my sister, the real success story. They never outright said I was a failure, but silence is louder than words. When my sister got promoted, they posted about it like it was the second coming. When I returned from deployment, they didn't even meet me at the airport. "You're always so busy," my dad said, as if I'd missed a dentist appointment, not spent 7 months running black ops across borders no one dares name. At Thanksgiving, my own seat was handed to a neighbor's son because he just got accepted to law school, and that's a big deal. I ate standing up by the sink, my medals still packed in a box in the garage. That night, I told myself I was done. I wouldn't chase their approval anymore. I had survived enemy fire. I didn't need to survive my own family's indifference. Then, last month, I sat in the back of a command briefing, there to observe, nothing more. The room buzzed with names and ranks, titles that never seemed to fit right on me. Until the door opened. A commander walked in, eyes scanning, and stopped. Right on me. He squared his shoulders, stood straighter, and said, "Ma'am, you're the general?" And suddenly, the room fell silent. Not for her. Not for my sister. For me. That moment wasn't sweet. It was sharp. It was years of being unseen cracking open in a single breath. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't embarrassed to take up space. My name is Colleen Walsh. I've led men into fire, held the hands of soldiers dying in sand, and made decisions that still keep me awake. But the hardest thing I've ever done was survive being invisible in my own home. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Please just drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It means more than you think. Sometimes, knowing someone is out there makes it easier to tell the truth out loud. And if my story reaches you, if it makes you feel less alone, please consider subscribing. It helps this truth go further. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Colleen Walsh, oldest daughter of the Walsh family, 3 generations deep in uniform, discipline, and unspoken expectations. We were practically raised on base protocol. At Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the military wasn't just a career. It was our family religion. My father, Roy Walsh, retired as a colonel from the Air Force. My mother, Marilyn, served as a combat medic and wore her silence like another set of medals. My younger brother's now a major, and Erica, my baby sister, is about to be pinned as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And me? I'm the one they don't talk about. To the family, I'm the quitter, the one who walked away from West Point after year 1. They said I couldn't handle the discipline, the structure, said I didn't have what it took. But none of them knew I didn't leave. I was pulled, handpicked for a covert intelligence program so classified it didn't officially exist. No graduation, no ceremony, no framed photo on the wall. Just a series of one-way tickets to places no tourist ever should go. For the last 20 years, I haven't been absent from their lives. I've just been erased. I sent birthday flowers to Mom, a Christmas card to Dad with a fake address stamped in Maryland. I watched from afar as Erica climbed the ranks, as my brother got married on a base chapel lawn, as their lives unfolded in neat, public chapters. I wasn't in the picture, literally. A cousin once told me there was a family photo where I'd been cropped out to balance the frame. They said I quit because I wasn't tough enough. What they didn't know, what I couldn't tell them, was that I spent 6 months buried in operations in Damascus, that I spent 4 days hiding inside the walls of a hostage compound in Libya, coordinating a rescue that saved 30 civilians, that in the mission dubbed Candle Strike, I lost 3 of my men and a piece of myself I still haven't found again. And still, I came back. Just never home. You don't tell those stories in this family unless they come with medals and press coverage. I had neither. Just scars. Most of them invisible. Then came the call. It was early fall. Crisp air, gold leaves clinging to the end of summer. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was brisk, not unkind but cold, like a nurse reading you a chart, not speaking to her daughter. Erica's getting promoted. You should come. Just don't wear anything weird. Don't make her look bad. No, how are you? No, we'd love to see you. Just don't embarrass us. I didn't argue. I said, I'll be there. Not because I expected a red carpet, not because I thought they'd welcome me with open arms. I was going back for one reason, to see if, for once, they could look at me and see the woman behind the shadow. To see if, in the right light, they'd realize they'd misjudged me all these years. That night, I stood in front of my closet. In the back was my old dress uniform, crisp, untouched, folded as if still waiting for a ceremony that never happened. I put it into my suitcase. Next to it, I hung a soft, neutral blouse and slacks, clothes that wouldn't draw attention, that wouldn't scream for validation. Just quiet fabric in quiet tones. In the mirror, my face stared back at me. Sharp eyes, lines around the mouth from too many sunrises in deserts. A face no longer young, but not old either. Just settled. No rank, no applause, no resentment either. Almost time, I whispered to the glass. I didn't know if I meant time to forgive or time to let the silence finally speak for itself. I arrived at Fort Campbell right on time. No warm welcome, no one waiting out front, not even a nod from the MP at the gate. The VIP parking lot was already full, lined with Lexus SUVs and government-issued sedans. I parked by the logistics unit's fence, where the gravel crunched under my boots like it remembered who I was, even if no one else did. The house hadn't changed much. Same beige paint, same weathered porch swing, same flag swaying with ceremonial pride. I opened the door and stepped into the same old air that smelled like lemon cleaner and old paperbacks. My mother stood in the dining room, placing printed name cards along the table. Without looking up, she said, "Go change your shirt. You and Erica will sit next to each other, but please don't interrupt her speech tomorrow." No hello, no hug, no comment on the fact I'd driven 10 hours to be here, just instructions, like always. My father greeted me the way officers greet each other when one's about to retire early. A firm pat on the back, a nod of recognition, something like respect, but stripped of familiarity. "Good you made it," he said, eyes already sliding past me to the room behind. Erica made her entrance like a debutante in dress blues. Her uniform was impeccable, bars polished to perfection, ribbons laid out like she'd won a war alone. She swept across the room, kissing hands and charming friends. When she finally noticed me, she gestured toward me with a manicured hand. "This is my sister. She used to be in the military for a bit. Now she's working in admin, I think." There was laughter. Light, polite, the kind that cuts deeper because no one thinks it's cruel. A cousin leaned in and asked in a half-whisper, "So what do you do now? VA office? Better than nothing, right?" Better than nothing. I smiled. Not wide enough to show teeth, just enough to let it die there. I said nothing. There's a kind of dignity in silence, especially when your truth is classified. Inside the house, every wall was a shrine. Framed photographs of my siblings in uniform, graduation portraits, retirement ceremonies, award dinners. I scanned every frame. None of them held my face. The last one with me in it was from 2004, just after I left West Point. I remembered because I was cropped out later. They said it was to fit the new frame. A little niece, maybe 6 or 7, tugged on my hand. "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" she asked, eyes round and excited. I crouched to her level and smiled. "Sweetheart, I once wrote a plan that helped 30 soldiers make it home alive. That's better than any shot I've ever taken." She blinked, then ran off to play with a plastic tank. Dinner was a small pre-ceremony event, just family and a few close officers. Erica played the perfect host, all grace and calculation. At one point, someone complimented her on her poise. She beamed. "I've been practicing my speech," she said, sipping wine. Then, casually, "I want people to know that you don't have to walk away from something to realize you were wrong." The air in the room shifted. Just slightly. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The message was clear, and it had my name all over it. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter behind me, but I wanted none of it. In the distance, a brass band was rehearsing, notes carried through the night like ghosts. I sat on the edge of the steps, watching the wind move through the trees. Tomorrow, I would sit quietly, let her have her moment. But truth has a voice of its own. And when it chooses to speak, no one, not even Erica, will be able to talk over it. The hall at Fort Campbell was a cathedral of command. High ceilings, brass light fixtures casting golden halos over rigid rows of folding chairs, all arranged by rank and title like a battlefield without bullets. I was seated in the 3rd row from the back, wedged between a junior officer's fiancé and someone's overly perfumed aunt. Our row was labeled Family Unassigned, a bureaucratic way of saying, "You're here, but not really." Erica stood tall behind the podium at the front. The flag stood to her left, polished boots to her right. She had that look in her eyes, controlled fire, the kind you learn to perfect during war games and promotion boards. She spoke of loyalty, perseverance, and, my favorite, the importance of distancing oneself from those who once abandoned the sacred trust of the uniform. Every word calculated, every glance choreographed. The speech wasn't just for her superiors. It was aimed at ghosts, and one ghost in particular. When my name was mentioned, only in passing, as a family member in attendance, I noticed a few heads turn. A couple of officers exchanged hushed comments. One leaned toward another and whispered, "She looks familiar. Where have I seen her before?" I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes ahead, posture neutral, face unreadable. That's when he entered, General Hammond. He walked in with quiet weight, the kind that makes a room straighten its spine before it even realizes it. He scanned the audience briefly before his eyes locked on mine. A flash of recognition, then a brisk, direct march toward my seat. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat, but the air around me shifted like the wind before a siren. The general came to a sharp stop beside me, heels clicking. He raised his hand in a textbook salute, sharp, proud, and public. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady and clear. "General Walsh, it's an honor to see you again." The room didn't just quiet, it froze. Erica's voice cracked mid-sentence. Her hand holding the note card trembled. The applause that had rippled after her earlier lines had vanished. She was no longer the gravitational pull in the room. I rose to return the salute, not because I needed validation, but because I refused to let a man who once trusted me with lives stand alone in respect. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother drop her water glass. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. My father stood halfway up in reflex, then slowly sank back into his seat as if trying to disappear into the upholstery. A young officer behind me leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, not as quietly as he thought, "Is that her? The ghost commander from Dagger?" Erica struggled to gather herself. She tried to continue, voice brittle and eyes scanning the room for anchor points. But the energy had shifted. Eyes no longer hung on her every word. They were pinned to me, or worse, to the gap between what they thought they knew and what they now realized they didn't. The ceremony ended with polite applause, but the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a controlled burn. As the guests filed out and the officers mingled, Erica cornered me near the exit. No congratulations, no smile. "Why didn't you say something?" she hissed under her breath. "You let me stand up there, like a fool. Was that your plan?" I looked at her, not unkindly, but without yielding. "If you need the truth to shrink, you never stood tall to begin with." Her mouth tightened. She blinked twice, fast, like trying to hold something back. I walked past her before she could reply, the heels of my boots echoing against the polished floor. This time, as I walked away, I didn't feel the usual sting of invisible eyes mocking my back. Instead, I felt the weight of confusion behind me. An entire room unsure of the roles they'd been assigned to play, now realizing the cast list might have been wrong all along. After the ceremony, I didn't return to my family's house. I drove back to the base and let myself into the quiet, nondescript guest quarters they'd assigned me. Standard military beige walls, stiff bedding, and a lamp that hummed faintly when turned on. It was the kind of room built to host people briefly and forget them quickly. I dropped my keys onto the dresser, kicked off my shoes, and spotted something that didn't belong. A plain manila envelope resting squarely at the center of the desk. No name, no seal, no handwriting, just sitting there, like it had always been waiting for me. I opened it. Inside was a printed scan of an email, time-stamped 2 years ago. No sender listed, just a message forwarded from an encrypted relay server. The subject line, "Reckless Operation, Civilian Casualties." The body of the email contained allegations against a Colleen W., accusing her of commanding an unsanctioned mission that resulted in multiple civilian deaths. The message claimed that the details were buried in redacted reports and urged a fringe military blog to expose the rot within. It was a strange sensation reading your own death sentence drafted by someone else. The wording stopped me cold, because I recognized it, not just the operation it referenced, but the specific phrasing, nearly word for word from an after-action classified report I had once reviewed in a steel-lined bunker in Stuttgart. That report had only been seen by 3 people: myself, the lead analyst, and 1 junior officer with peripheral clearance, Erica. The dates lined up with a period when I had suddenly and inexplicably been flagged for a brief internal investigation. At the time, I was told it was an automated red flag system reviewing anomaly data. Routine. Nothing to worry about. The case had been dismissed within days. I had believed them. But someone had made sure the smoke lingered long after the fire had been put out. I took the envelope with me. I didn't bother changing. I found Erica at the after party, still dressed in her uniform, surrounded by admirers, basking in the warm buzz of achievement. I waited until the crowd thinned, then caught her just as she stepped outside to take a call. I held up the scan. She glanced at it, her eyes catching on the page as if seeing it again for the first time. "Did you send this?" I asked, my voice even, not accusing, just asking for the truth. She stared at me for a long moment, and then, without blinking, she said, "Yes." I nodded slowly. "Why?" Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders dropped, like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Because you weren't supposed to win," she said. "You left. You didn't stay and build something. You don't get to come back and still be more important." I didn't move. I didn't speak. She pressed on, voice cracking. "They never stopped talking about you. Even when you were gone. Even when I did everything right." I thought, if I could just erase you from the picture, I could finally be seen. Silence fell between us, heavier than any accusation. I could see the child in her, the little sister who once trailed behind me, begging to be included, needing to feel special in a house where excellence was currency. "You do realize," I said finally quietly, "that leaking classified information is a criminal offense?" Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing again. She said nothing. I didn't push further. I turned and walked away. The cool night air hit me like a wave. I clutched the envelope in my hand, fingers trembling. Not from rage, but from the deep, quiet ache of understanding. Sometimes the blade in your back comes from the same hand that once helped you learn to walk. It was the sound of the base alarm that jolted me awake, not the usual morning bugle, but something sharper, urgent, piercing. A siren built not to wake you gently, but to force adrenaline into your blood. My phone lit up a moment later. Emergency protocol active. All high-clearance personnel were being summoned to the coordination center. I didn't have time to question why. Muscle memory took over. I was dressed and out the door in minutes. The halls of Fort Campbell were flooded with movement. Officers in various states of alert, some still pulling on boots, others already seated in front of flickering monitors. At the entrance of the main ops room, a grim-looking sergeant handed me a file, thin, but heavy in implication. A breach. A classified dossier connected to Operation Dagger, the mission I had led in the shadow corridors of Syria, had just been published to an encrypted forum on the dark web. The leak was recent, time-stamped within the last 3 hours. And worse, the forensic trace led back to an internal IP. Specifically, an inactive device once assigned to me, still embedded in the base system. It was like waking up in a life you didn't remember signing up for. Within half an hour, I was seated across from General Hammond and 2 officials from Military Intelligence Command. The room felt colder than it was. They didn't say I was under arrest, but I was under suspicion. They asked for full access to my communications from the past 6 months. I didn't argue. I gave them everything. Still, something didn't sit right. My mind circled back to the email, the one Erica had sent, the scan that had landed mysteriously on my desk. I hadn't dug deeper at the time, but now, with the full tools of the agency at my disposal, I retrieved the metadata and decrypted the sending path. What I found was startling. The anonymous sender had used an outdated link to an auto-backup server that once archived mission logs. That server had long been decommissioned, or so I thought. The link they used triggered a dormant process, one that unintentionally retrieved and attached a hidden file with top clearance intel. The file that had now surfaced online, a careless mistake, but not a random one. When I traced the origin device of the email, it pointed to a machine that had been logged into 2 days earlier using an active credential, Erica's. She had checked in late at the base for training prep, according to records. I remembered then. She'd mentioned leaving her laptop at the comm station overnight, unlocked, unattended. Her tone had been off, as if she'd expected me to say something about it. Now, her access was part of a forensic trail. I stared at the glowing screen. My sister, the little girl who once cried when I left for West Point. The woman who now, maybe out of desperation, was unraveling herself thread by thread. Before I could process more, a knock at my temporary quarters broke the storm inside my head. It was my father. He looked older than I remembered. Less stern, more human. We hadn't spoken alone in years. He didn't say hello. Just stood at the threshold and asked quietly, "Is it true? Did you leak it?" I met his eyes. There was no anger there, just fear. For me, for the family name. Maybe for everything he'd ever believed in about honor and service. I didn't flinch. "I don't need you to believe me," I said, "but I will prove the truth. Not for me, for the people still trusting this system with their lives." He nodded once, said nothing else, and walked away. The next morning, I requested permission to lead the internal investigation. It was unorthodox, but technically I was still on classified reserve duty and had the clearance to operate. More importantly, I had the motive no one else did, to expose the leak without burning down the institution that had shaped and nearly buried me. General Hammond listened without interrupting, then stood slowly, walked around the briefing table, and extended his hand. "General," he said, eyes steady, "the floor is yours." The room was so quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like static in my ears. I sat at the head of the Strategic Command briefing room, where I had once been denied entry by rank, now seated by necessity. Across from me were representatives from the Military Investigation Bureau and Base Security Command. Their faces were stony, their notebooks open but untouched. I laid out my hypothesis calmly. The breach wasn't intentional sabotage, it was a cascade. A sequence of reckless decisions and misjudged steps that began with an anonymous email. One sent not with the intention to betray, but to provoke. And in doing so, triggered a minefield. I presented metadata, system trails, and a digital breadcrumb that began with Erica's email and ended with a leaked classified file. They didn't dispute my logic, but they did one worse. General Hammond appointed an internal task force, comprised not of experts or outsiders, but my own family. I was to lead the team as primary analyst and field coordinator. My father, Colonel Roy Walsh, would manage campaign intel archives from past operations. He still had restricted access from his advisory post-retirement role. Erica was to trace internal system vulnerabilities and access points. And my mother, with her old training as a combat medic and a side specialty in biological trace evidence, was assigned to assist forensic recovery from the laptop left behind in the tech bay. It was like being thrown into a theater piece where every actor knew their role, but none wanted to share the stage. The first task force meeting was frigid. My father opened with a briefing, eyes glued to the screen rather than anyone in the room. He spoke in clipped tones like he was reading an obituary. Erica presented her segment next. Short, efficient, sterile. Her voice carried no inflection. She didn't look up once. Only my mother occasionally glanced between us, like she was watching her children turn into people she no longer recognized. But I wasn't there for warmth. I was there for results. And then the breakthrough came. While combing through an archival node tied to Erica's server scans, our security AI flagged a dormant Trojan embedded in a 2017 operations archive. It had never been activated, just tucked into the shell of a logistics file. The date stood out. 2017. That was the year I clashed heads with Derek Glade, a fellow strategist during a joint effort in Mosul. He'd wanted an aggressive sweep through civilian zones to eliminate hostile presence. I'd blocked it, demanding a phased containment strategy. It was the right call. But it made me a liability to him, and a symbol of what he considered bureaucratic weakness. Derek wasn't just a grudge holder. He had once held temporary encryption override for the campaign servers. If he'd planted the malware back then, it could have slept unnoticed until someone, like Erica, accidentally triggered it by accessing the wrong pathway. That's when my mother silently handed me a folder. "From Candlestrike," she said. "You left it behind when you shipped out." I read it. Back then, I thought you were hiding. Now I think you were just trying to survive. Quietly. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The words she gave me weren't an apology. They were something older, heavier. Recognition. I smiled, not because I was proud, but because something had shifted. Later that evening, our systems traced a login ping from a remote IP. It had tried, unsuccessfully, to scrub logs tied to the original breach. The location? A motel just outside Fort Campbell. A 3-day booking, paid in cash. The name used on the reservation, Derek Glade. It wasn't just about my sister anymore, or even my family. There was someone out there, clever, patient, and willing to use our fractures as his camouflage, a man hiding behind the chaos we'd made for ourselves. The raid on the decommissioned tech bunker felt like a storm front moving in, silent at first, then electric and sharp. Under emergency authorization, we surrounded the area with strategic precision. Derek had returned to the one place no one was monitoring, the old data relay room from a forgotten division, still wired into the secondary military net. He was halfway through uploading a compressed bundle of data when we breached. He didn't resist. He didn't even flinch. Just looked at me and said, "Took you long enough?" In interrogation, he laid it all out, not proudly, but clearly. "I didn't want to take you down in public, just wanted you out of the room. The intel leak was supposed to paint you as a liability. Once your clearance was stripped, no more NATO Council, no more front seat at strategic talks. You rose too fast. People stopped questioning you." His voice was bitter, not manic. A man who'd clung to his grudge until it soured into obsession. He'd built a strategy to exploit our family's divisions, banking on Erica's misstep to ignite the rest. I realized then, he didn't break us. He just watched us unravel, then planted his flag. When Erica read the transcript of his confession, she sat still, silent. She stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. After a few minutes, she spoke without looking at me. "I didn't know what I did would lead to this." I folded my arms. Sometimes we set fire to a dry field because we're jealous. We forget people sleep in that grass. Her face crumpled slightly, but she held it together. That was Erica. Pride armored her guilt. The next day, during the compilation of our final report, Erica submitted an addendum. She took full responsibility for initiating the chain of emails that ultimately enabled Derek's breach. Though she wasn't charged criminally, there was no intent to leak state secrets. She accepted a formal reprimand. It would cost her promotion eligibility for the next 5 years. She signed it without being asked. It didn't feel like a victory. At the concluding task force meeting, we sat across from each other once more, but this time it was different. Erica no longer avoided my gaze, and when our father stood up to give his closing remarks, he paused, then said, "I owe an apology to this entire team, especially to Colleen. I let medals and pride make me blind to what matters." It was the first time I'd ever heard him admit fault, let alone in a room full of brass. Erica didn't cry, neither did I, but when I met her eyes, I no longer saw the competitor who'd tried to erase me. I saw a woman learning how to stand on her own, without pushing anyone else down to do it. The morning of the regional strategy conference arrived with a fog that clung to the base like memory. I stood backstage, beneath the low hum of the projector and the subtle click of name badges against uniforms. The banner behind me read, "Redefining Shadow Warfare. Post-conflict intelligence in asymmetric environments." 62 commanders, 30 high-ranking advisors, and nearly 100 observers had RSVP'd. Among the list of attendees was Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh, her name neatly listed under Field Officer Trainee. I had sent her the invitation myself. No explanation, no warning. Just one line typed in the notes section of the email. "It's time to learn what you thought I didn't know." The lights dimmed. I walked to the podium with no fanfare, no escort. Just a pointer in my hand and a lifetime of invisible scars on my back. I began with the simplest truth. Some missions never get a name. Some leaders never get a plaque. And some battles don't start at borders. They start where judgment replaces understanding. I saw heads tilt. Some familiar faces, officers who'd once echoed Erica's criticisms, looked at me with recalibrated respect. A few whispered among themselves. One leaned to another. "That's the woman who wrote the Eastern European Defense Doctrine in 16. Erica sat in the second row, her posture straight, pen poised, eyes locked on me. She didn't blink, she didn't fidget. And I knew, this time, she was here to listen. Midway through, I pivoted to an unreleased segment of the candle strike operation. For the first time in public record, I disclosed a classified decision I'd made alone in the field. I signed the override order that spared a hostile zone because 7 children were trapped inside. That signature almost ended my career. I would make that same decision again. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because truth doesn't need forgiveness. It only needs to be seen. Gasps rippled through the room, not from the drama, but from the clarity. War was no longer just a matter of territory. It was moral terrain. And leadership wasn't just about being right. It was about being ready to carry the weight of choice. As I closed the session, I turned to the stage's side microphone and said, "To conclude, I've asked Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh to share her reflections as a next-generation officer." Erica stood slowly. Her voice was firm, not flawless. Her eyes were wet, but her shoulders squared. "I grew up thinking accolades were the end goal, that who stood tallest got heard. But today, I learned that real honor is in knowing who you can learn from and having the courage to admit it." The room stood in ovation, not for me, but for something larger. For the idea that strength could wear quiet, that leadership could be taught by those we once envied, and that learning, even in uniform, never truly ends. In the back row, my mother sat with her hands in her lap. She didn't clap, but she nodded. For the first time, it felt like approval, not of my rank, but of my journey. As the crowd dispersed, an older general approached, his grip firm as he shook my hand. "I used to believe women had no place commanding battlefields," he said. I was wrong. I smiled, not out of victory, not out of pride. "Mistakes don't define us," I said, "but refusing to learn from them does. Today, you learned. That's what matters." A week after the conference, I sent 3 invitations, one to my father, Colonel Roy, one to my mother, Marilyn, and the last to Erica. The location was deliberate, the old family house on the edge of Fort Campbell. It was the same house where I'd once spent a single, restless night after graduating from West Point. This time, I arrived first. I set the table. I took the seat at the head, the one my father had always claimed. When they walked in, no one said a word. My mother held a dish in foil. Erica avoided eye contact. My father's expression was unreadable. Once we were seated, I didn't offer pleasantries. "I didn't call this dinner for apologies," I said. "I called it to speak the truth, my truth, for the first time, from my mouth." And so I began. I told them I hadn't quit the service. I'd been recruited into intelligence. I recounted the time I was detained for 3 days underground in Iraq after a failed extraction route was leaked by a counteragent. I described the time I gave the order to shell a supply depot to save an Australian recon team. 3 civilians were injured, none seriously, but I spent 8 months under inquiry and was eventually cleared. I told them I'd declined a medal for a classified Syrian relief mission. Accepting it would have risked diplomatic tensions, and I chose silence over glory. The room didn't breathe. My mother's eyes welled with tears. Erica stared at her plate. My father remained still, hands folded in front of him. Then he asked, so quietly I almost missed it, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I met his eyes. "Because you never asked. And if you had, I don't think you would have believed me." It wasn't an attack. It was just the truth. My mother murmured, "I thought those care packages you sent were your way of saying sorry." I shook my head. They weren't apologies. They were reminders that I still existed, even after I'd been erased from every family photo. I reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. I slid it across to Erica. Inside was a printed copy of the anonymous email, the one she'd sent years ago that nearly ended my career. "I didn't keep this to incriminate you. I kept it to remind you that words, seemingly invisible, can be as deadly as bullets." No one interrupted. Then I spoke clearly, with no malice, just intent. "I don't expect acceptance, but if we're going to move forward, it starts with acknowledging the person you chose not to see." Erica stood. She walked over to me and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. No words. My father rose slowly, moved to the old family shelf, and picked up a framed photo from a long-ago summer barbecue. He stared at it for a moment. "This one's missing someone," he said. "We'll take a new one." I didn't smile. I just nodded. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I no longer needed to hold on to what hurt. A month after the conference, I returned to DC. I'd resumed my quiet routine as a part-time strategic advisor for NATO. Most of my days were spent in video briefings, analyzing simulation models, offering insight on asymmetric warfare in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. I lived alone in a modest apartment overlooking the Potomac. Still woke at 5:30. Still wrote my briefings in black ink. Still didn't return messages after 9 p.m. But one thing had changed. Once a month, I taught a special course at Fort Campbell on soft strategy in the age of non-traditional combat. Erica was always there, never missed a class. She sat in the front row, asked the most difficult questions, challenged me, even debated me, and sometimes she went quiet when I spoke about the missions that had once pitted us against each other. One afternoon, after class, she handed me a thin binder. Inside was a training reform proposal, modeled off concepts I'd introduced. "I don't need your signature," she said. "I just need to know what you think." I wrote one word on the cover: advance. Our family now existed in a quiet kind of motion. My mother sent handwritten notes each month, often just a line or two. "Are you eating enough?" she asked in her last one. My father had started telling his friends that his daughter advises high-level strategy, no longer just somewhere overseas. We didn't have a new portrait, but the next time I looked at the one on the mantle, I was in it. Not replaced, not erased. At the end of one session, a young cadet stayed behind. Nervous, maybe 23. He asked, "Ma'am, in war, what's the hardest part?" I paused, then told him the only answer that ever felt honest. Surviving without becoming a statue, not turning your wounds into weapons. That evening, I took a walk behind the training barracks. The sun was setting in gold-orange haze. Erica appeared beside me, holding a small birthday cake in a plastic container. She handed it to me with a half smile. 3 words were written on top in blue icing. General, sister, teacher. I didn't need applause. I didn't need history books to mention my name. I just needed them to look at me, not through medals or mistakes, but through the eyes that once misunderstood, and now, finally, understood. In life, some battles leave no scars on the skin, but carve canyons in the soul. We learn that strength isn't always about who speaks the loudest, but who chooses silence with dignity. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to stay when it's easier to walk away. If this story moved you, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share what spoke to you, and don't forget to subscribe. Every voice matters, and yours is no exception.